My son sent me a message that shattered my soul. It read, "Mom, don't even bother coming to the wedding. Mariana doesn't want you there. She says your presence would ruin everything." I just stood there frozen, phone in my hand, reading those words over and over. Each one was a punch to the gut. At that very moment, in my pocket, was the receipt for the wire transfer I was about to make. The last of the $20,000 I had sacrificed for 2 years to save. "My name is Rachel Hernandez. I'm 76 years old, and I'm from Chicago. Thank you to the channel Grandparents' Voices for letting me tell my truth. And thank you, the person listening to me right now. If this story resonates with you, please support me with a like and subscribe to the channel. There's a new story here every day, and maybe one of them will be just like yours." Ever since I was young, I worked as a linewoman for the phone company. I spent my whole life climbing poles, fixing wires, enduring the scorching sun, and more than once, getting shocks that left me trembling. I was never rich, but I was always a hard worker. I married young and had only one son, Daniel. He was my pride and joy. Everything I earned, I invested in giving him the best I could. New notebooks for school, shoes when his old ones wore out, a simple gift on his birthdays. Over the years, Daniel grew up, and I became a widow. My husband, David, passed on more than 15 years ago. Since then, my life revolved around my son. When he met Mariana, I tried to accept her with a smile, though I noticed from the start that her eyes looked at me with a certain disdain. A haughty girl, always talking about trips, luxuries, the life she dreamed of. Me, with my worn-out shirt and my hands full of scars, I never fit into that world she wanted. But Daniel was in love, and I didn't want to be a burden. I kept telling myself that in time, she would accept me, that if I just tried a little harder, I could earn her respect. So when he told me they were getting married, I felt a deep joy. I thought, finally, I'll see my son start his own family, and I can help in some way. That's when I decided to give them the honeymoon she always mentioned. A trip to Cancun, the place of her dreams. I didn't have big savings. I lived off my pension and a few odd jobs I did in the neighborhood. But for 2 years I saved dollar by dollar, sometimes even skipping my medications, all to gather that amount that would let them fulfill their dream. The week of the wedding, Daniel sent me the account for the hotel where they were staying. That day I got up early, put on my straw hat, and walked to the bank. I took a number, stood in line, and waited patiently. I had my phone ready to confirm the transfer. My heart was beating fast, but it was a beat of excitement. I imagined my son's face when he got the news. But then, the phone rang. A message. I opened it, and there it was. "Mom, don't even bother coming to the wedding. Mariana doesn't want you there. She says your presence would ruin everything." I felt a current run through me from head to toe. Not an electric shock like the ones I knew so well, but a direct blow to my soul. I stood there, motionless, as the line moved forward without me. I thought of the 2 years of sacrifice, of every dollar saved, of every simple meal I accepted just to save a little more. All for what? To be excluded from the most important day of his life. In my pocket was the transfer slip. It just needed one click. But my fingers didn't move. Instead, I opened the banking app and canceled everything. In that same instant, I blocked my own son's number. I put the phone back in my pocket, took a deep breath, and walked out of the bank without looking back. I didn't cry there. No. I walked the streets of Chicago with my head held high, but inside, a storm was tearing me apart. When I got home, I sat in the rocking chair on the porch, and then, yes, the tears came on their own. It wasn't just sadness. It was sadness mixed with relief, because deep down I knew it was time to stop humiliating myself. As I watched the cloudy sky, memories of Daniel as a child came flooding back, once he fell off his bike and broke his arm. I spent 3 whole nights in the hospital, sitting by his side, without sleep, just holding his hand. And now, so many years later, he was telling me my presence would ruin his wedding. Life deals some harsh blows, but that night I made a decision. That money would no longer be for them. It would be for me, to start living for myself for the first time in many years. What I didn't imagine was that this cruel message was just the beginning of an even greater storm, because Daniel and Mariana wouldn't settle for a no. And what came next was lower, dirtier, and more painful than anything I could have ever foreseen. I barely slept that night. I stayed in the rocking chair, listening to the distant hum of cars on the avenue and the occasional bark of a stray dog. Daniel's message kept replaying in my head, over and over, an echo that gave me no peace. "Mom, don't even bother coming. Mariana doesn't want you." They weren't just words. They were knives, because behind each syllable was the confirmation of something I had already felt deep down for a long time. To them, I no longer mattered. I woke up with swollen eyes but a firm decision. That money I had saved for 2 years was not going to end up in the hands of someone who despised me. That money was going to be for me, to start a new chapter, even though I didn't know what I would do with it yet. The next day, the first thing I did was go to the bank. I asked to speak with the manager, a young man in his 30s named Marcus, who had always treated me with patience. I told him calmly, "I want to lock all my accounts so that no one else, not even by mistake, can move a single dollar without my authorization." He looked at me, surprised, but didn't ask many questions. He prepared the papers, offered me a coffee, and within minutes, everything was locked down tight. I left the bank feeling lighter, as if I had dropped a backpack I'd been carrying for years. But deep inside, I knew that wasn't going to be enough. Daniel wouldn't just let it go. Neither would Mariana. People like that, used to getting everything their way, don't take no for an answer without fighting back. And I was right. That same afternoon, while I was fixing some light bulbs in the living room, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered out of habit. On the other end, Mariana's cold voice. "Mrs. Hernandez, I'm calling because Daniel asked me to. He's worried. He says he still hasn't received the transfer for the honeymoon. The package expires tomorrow." Her tone was curt, almost demanding. For a moment, I felt my hand tremble, but I took a deep breath and answered slowly. "Mariana, listen carefully. There will be no transfer. And tell my son that if you keep insisting, I will go straight to a lawyer." There was an awkward silence. It took her a few seconds to react. Finally, with that cynical tone she always had, she said, "Fine, Rachel, have it your way. Just don't complain later when you're the one to blame for ruining the most important moment of your son's life." And she hung up. I sat there with the phone in my hand, still hearing the click of the call ending. That was the last time I spoke to her, but not the last time they tried to break me. 3 days later, while I was having a sweet roll and coffee on the porch, my phone rang again. This time it was Daniel. I didn't answer. A message came immediately. "I don't know what's wrong with you, Mom. People are saying you're losing your mind. If you don't fix this, I'll have to find another way." For the first time in weeks, I let out a bitter laugh, not of joy, but of resignation, because reading that, I understood something clearly. This was no longer the little boy I held in my arms when he was sick. This was a cold, calculating man, willing to humiliate his own mother just to get money. It was then that I decided to seek legal help. I went to see Mr. Damien, an older lawyer recommended by a neighbor. I told him everything, from the beginning, without hiding a thing. The man listened patiently and then said with a firm voice, "Rachel, you did the right thing by canceling that transfer, and what we're going to do now is protect your assets. No one will be able to move anything without your consent, and if your son tries anything, we will have more than enough proof to stop him." I left his office with the first spark of peace in my chest. Finally, someone was telling me I wasn't crazy, that what I was doing made sense. But the calm didn't last long. 4 days later, I was having coffee on the porch when I heard a car park in front of my house. It was Daniel. He came with that fake smile that never reached his eyes. "Mom, we need to talk," he said from the gate. I crossed my arms and answered without moving from the porch. "Talk from there, Daniel. You don't need to come in." He tried to stay calm, but his voice trembled with rage. "What's wrong with you, Mom? I've already made commitments. The agency, the hotel. You can't just block everything like that. That's your problem, not mine," I replied without hesitation. Then he dropped the mask, he slammed his hand on the gate and raised his voice. "Are you really going to do this? After everything I've done for you?" I looked him in the eyes and answered dryly, "What have you done for me, Daniel? It was always the other way around. Every time you looked for me, it was because you needed something." He was speechless, red with anger, until, in a whisper filled with venom, he said, "If you don't want to fix this the easy way, I'll do it the hard way. I'll talk to a judge. I'll say you're not in your right mind anymore, that you can't manage your money, and then we'll see who decides." That day, I understood just how far he was willing to go. It wasn't just contempt. It was a direct threat to take what was mine, to have me declared incompetent to take over everything. I stood motionless, feeling the heat rise in my veins. But I didn't raise my voice. I just replied, "Try whatever you want, Daniel, but don't forget I'm still your mother." He didn't expect that response. He looked at me with fury, turned around, and left without saying goodbye. That same afternoon, I went to see Mr. Damien again. I told him, word for word, about Daniel's threat. The lawyer listened with a frown and told me, "We're going to get ahead of this. Tomorrow, we will draft a notarized affidavit and also get a medical certificate of your mental soundness. With that, any attempt at a conservatorship will fall apart in seconds." And so we did. The next day, I had all the papers signed, each document laminated and stored in a blue folder. For the first time in a long time, I felt proud of myself, proud of not letting myself be humiliated anymore. But Daniel didn't stop. 3 days later, I received a court notice. He had initiated conservatorship proceedings, claiming I could no longer manage my assets. What Daniel didn't know was that I had already anticipated everything. When I received the court notice, my hands trembled. The mailman handed me a thick envelope with my full name, exact address, and an official seal, written in cold, formal letters. My own son had filed for legal conservatorship, arguing that I no longer had the mental capacity to manage my assets. I sat on the porch, looking at the open paper on my lap. I didn't cry. I didn't despair. But inside, rage was boiling. How was this possible? How could Daniel, the same child I cared for through entire nights when he had a fever, now accuse me of being incompetent? I didn't take long to react. I put the documents in a folder, and the next morning I showed up early at Mr. Damien's office. When he saw me walk in with the envelope in my hand, he already knew what I was bringing. He opened it slowly, reviewed each page, and when he finished, he looked up and said in a firm voice, "Rachel, this isn't just disrespectful. This is fraud. Your son is trying to strip you of everything. But don't worry. You already have the notarized affidavit and the medical certificate. With those, this attempt will not succeed." His words calmed me, but not completely. Because it's one thing to have your papers in order, and another to face the public humiliation of a judge asking if you're really in your right mind. I barely slept that night. I remembered so many things, like the time Daniel lost his first job, and I covered his expenses for 6 months, paying for rent, electricity, and even groceries. Or when he bought his first car, and I helped him with the down payment. I never asked for anything back, and now he was repaying me with lawyers, with false papers, and with the intention of declaring me incompetent. The hearing was scheduled for a week later. Mr. Damien told me not to worry, that he had already prepared the defense with all the necessary documents, but I couldn't help the anxiety. Every morning when I woke up, I checked my blue folder again and again, with the laminated papers, the medical certificate, the affidavit, my expense receipts. I wanted everything to be perfect, as if that would give me strength. On the day of the hearing, I got up before dawn. I put on my best shirt, a dark blue button-down that I saved only for important occasions. I also ironed my twill pants and shined my shoes until they gleamed. It wasn't vanity, it was dignity. I wanted the judge to see me for who I am, a conscious, hard-working woman, capable of taking care of herself. Mr. Damien was waiting for me at the courthouse entrance. He shook my hand and said, "Stay calm, Rachel. You just have to answer calmly. The documents will speak for themselves." We entered the courtroom together. The air conditioning was strong, and the hum of the fans gave me goosebumps. Across from us, sitting at a table, was the judge in a black robe, and on the other side, Daniel and Mariana. Seeing them, there was a hard blow. Daniel avoided my gaze, but Mariana held hers with that haughty expression I knew so well, as if she had already won the battle. The judge opened the hearing with a solemn voice. "We are here to review the petition for conservatorship filed by Daniel Hernandez against his mother, Rachel Hernandez." Hearing my name like that, as if I were a defendant, shook me, but I remained firm. Daniel's lawyer spoke first. He argued that I was no longer fit to manage my assets, that I forgot things, that I was putting the family's financial legacy at risk. He even presented witnesses who claimed to have seen me disoriented on the street, people I didn't even know. Lies invented to tarnish my name. When it was our turn, Mr. Damien stood up calmly, opened the blue folder, and began to present the documents one by one. "Your Honor, here is the notarized affidavit. where Mrs. Hernandez declares full awareness of her actions. Here is the medical certificate issued by a specialist confirming her mental lucidity. And here, the records of her expense management, which clearly show she keeps her accounts in order. The judge took each document and reviewed them seriously. I watched him from my seat, my heart beating fast, but with my head held high. Then it was my turn to speak. The judge asked me if I knew why I was there. Of course I do, Your Honor. I'm here because my own son wants to take what is mine, inventing that I lack mental capacity. But I am still the same woman who worked for 40 years as a line woman, who raised her son with sacrifices, and who now only asks for respect. My voice came out firm, without hesitation. I saw Daniel lower his head and Mariana bite her lip. The hearing continued for almost an hour. In the end, the judge spoke clearly. After reviewing the documentation and listening to Mrs. Hernandez, this court determines that the petition for conservatorship is denied. Furthermore, I am referring this case to the district attorney's office to investigate possible perjury and fraud in the statements presented. In that instant, I felt an immense relief. I didn't jump for joy. I didn't make a scene. I just closed my eyes for a few seconds and took a deep breath. Justice. That's what I had just received. On the way out, Mr. Damien put his hand on my shoulder and said, "You see, Rachel, the truth always comes to light. Now we will prepare the criminal complaint against them." I nodded in silence. I knew the battle was just beginning. Daniel and Mariana were not going to be stopped by a court ruling. People like them always find another way to attack. That afternoon, back at home, I sat on the porch with a strong cup of coffee. I watched the orange sunset and thought about everything I had been through in those weeks. I had gone from being a mother willing to sacrifice her savings for love to being the target of a cruel betrayal. And the worst part was that it didn't come from a stranger, but from my own son. As I sipped my coffee, I made a promise to myself. I would never again allow myself to be walked over. That phase of enduring in silence was over. From now on, every attempt by Daniel and Mariana would be met with the truth, with documents, with dignity. What I didn't know was that they wouldn't be satisfied with their failure in court. The next blow would be even lower, and this time it would put at risk not only my assets, but also my name in the entire neighborhood. After the hearing, I thought things would calm down. The judge had denied the conservatorship petition, and on top of that, had ordered an investigation for possible fraud. I felt that I had finally regained some control over my life. But I was wrong. Daniel and Mariana didn't stop. On the contrary, they doubled down on their attacks, and this time it wasn't in the courtroom, but in the neighborhood, in daily life, where it hurts the most. The first sign came one ordinary morning. I was on the porch, drinking my coffee with a pastry from the corner bakery, when I got a call from my neighbor, Mr. Arindo. He was an older man I had known for years, a construction worker, always straightforward. "Rachel, are you okay?" he asked with a serious voice. "Yes. Why do you ask?" "Well, because they're saying ugly things about you. Daniel and his wife. They're saying you're not right in the head anymore, that you're spending money like crazy, that you're even giving away what you have." I was speechless for a few seconds. I felt my blood boil. It wasn't just in the courthouse anymore. Now they wanted to destroy my name in front of my own neighbors. "Thanks for letting me know, Mr. Arindo," I replied calmly. "Don't worry. I know what I'm going to do." I hung up the phone and sat there thinking. They knew that in my neighborhood everyone knew me as a hard-working, serious woman who never owed a dime. If they could tarnish that image, then they would have succeeded in isolating me. And that's what hurt the most. The betrayal disguised as public shame. I didn't just sit back. The next day, I went to a notary and drafted a formal statement with my notarized signature, making it clear that I was in full command of my faculties and that any rumor to the contrary was false. But I didn't stop there. I also made a more personal decision. That afternoon, I sat on the porch in front of my cell phone camera and recorded a video. It was nothing fancy. Just me, in my plaid shirt, sitting in my rocking chair, speaking directly to the camera. "I'm Rachel Hernandez. I'm 76 years old. I'm here in my home in Chicago, perfectly aware and taking care of my life as I always have. I want my neighbors and friends to know that I'm still the same person I've always been." I sent it to all my WhatsApp contacts, my closest neighbors, old work colleagues. It wasn't to justify myself. It was to make it clear that I was not going to stay silent. The following days were strange. On one hand, I felt the weight of gossip in the air. The lady at the tortilla stand looked at me funny, as if she hesitated to greet me. Some kids who used to ask me for help with their homework now walked right past, but I also received messages of support. Former colleagues told me, "Rachel, we saw it clearly in your video. You're still the same as always." That support gave me strength, and at the same time, it made it clear that Daniel and Mariana were not going to stop. People like that, when they lose on one front, they look for another to continue attacking, and so it was. A week later, while I was reviewing some bills at the kitchen table, I heard 3 loud knocks on the gate. When I opened it, there were 2 men in suits with clipboards in hand. "Good afternoon, are you Rachel Hernandez?" one asked in a neutral voice. "Yes, that's me. What can I do for you? We're from the National Bank's credit department. There's a loan registered in your name, and we need to confirm some details." I felt my stomach clench. "Excuse me, gentlemen, I haven't applied for any loan." They opened the folder and showed me the documents. There was my name, my address, even my ID number, and a fake signature, poorly done, like a mockery, and below, as a reference contact, Daniel Hernandez. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Gentlemen, that signature is not mine. I never applied for any credit. If you want to verify, I have my documents right here." I led them into the kitchen and showed them my ID, my papers in order. The men looked at each other uncomfortably. They made a couple of quick calls, and finally, one of them said to me, "Mrs. Hernandez, we apologize for the inconvenience. It seems this is a case of fraud. We're going to investigate it." When they left, I didn't waste a minute. I grabbed my straw hat and went straight to the police station. A veteran police officer named Leandro attended to me. I told him everything calmly: the forgery, the conservatorship threat, the rumors in the neighborhood. He listened without interrupting, and in the end, he said, "Rachel, what you're going through is more common than you think, but most elderly people stay silent. You're doing the right thing. We're going to file a report for attempted fraud and identity theft." I signed the complaint and left with the receipt in hand. I felt proud of not having stayed silent, of defending my name as I should. When I left, I went straight to Mr. Damien's office. When I told him about the fake loan, he frowned and said, "This is no longer just a family matter. This is a serious crime. We're going to move this to the prosecutor's office." And so we did. That same week, my blue folder filled up with more documents: a copy of the police report, my account statements, medical reports. Each page was like a shield against Daniel and Mariana's attacks. The nights were hard. I had trouble sleeping, because every time I closed my eyes, I could hear my son's voice telling me I was crazy, that he was going to take everything from me. But there was also a new fire inside me. I was no longer the resigned woman waiting in silence. Now I was fighting, with the truth in my hand. One Saturday morning while I was sweeping the patio, I received another unexpected visit. They knocked on the gate with 3 soft taps, different from the previous ones. I opened it and found a face I hadn't seen in over 10 years. Arnold, an old friend from my days as a linewoman. "Rachel, I came because I heard something, and I couldn't stay silent." I had him come in and served him coffee in the kitchen. After some small talk, he told me the truth. "I'm working at a firm, and I saw some documents that gave me a bad feeling. They're in your name, but they're not yours. They're forged papers, property inventories, asset transfers, and everything points to Daniel and Mariana." I stayed silent, staring at the bottom of my cup. I knew it. Deep down, I always knew. "Are you sure, Arnold? I saw it with my own eyes, Rachel." I even heard a guy from the notary's office say it was to speed up the conservatorship process for the old woman who doesn't know what she's doing anymore. That confirmation hit me like a bucket of ice. Water. It wasn't speculation anymore. It was proof that my own son was willing to forge documents to take what was mine. I walked him to the door and thanked him with a handshake. As soon as he left, I grabbed my blue folder and headed back to Mr. Damien's office. He listened to me with a serious face and, without wasting time, called a colleague at the prosecutor's office. "This is now fraud and forgery. We are filing a full criminal complaint." That night, sitting on my porch again, I felt I was no longer alone. I had proof. I had a trustworthy lawyer. I had my dignity intact, and although I knew the worst was yet to come, I also knew that this time they wouldn't catch me off guard. The days following Arnold's visit were a mix of apparent calm and constant alertness. I would get up early, make my coffee, sweep the patio, and sit on the porch as always. But inside me, there was a silent tension. I knew Daniel and Mariana wouldn't stop. That silence after the complaint was too strange, too calculated. I didn't have to wait long. One Friday morning, just as I was finishing watering the plants, I heard the sharp knock on the gate. This time it wasn't neighbors, nor collectors. It was two men in light-colored suits, wearing credentials hanging around their necks. "Mrs. Rachel Hernandez?" one of them asked. "Yes, that's me. We're here to deliver a court notice." They handed me a heavy, sealed envelope. Official seal. I took it with steady hands, though inside I felt a knot in my stomach. I signed the acknowledgement of receipt and closed the gate. I walked slowly to the kitchen table, opened the envelope, and began to read. What I saw chilled my blood. It was an urgent court order freezing all my bank accounts. The justification was absurd. Financial risk to the family. Possible incapacity of the holder to manage her assets. Exactly the same narrative as Daniel and Mariana, but this time with a judge behind it. I sat for a long time with the document open on the table. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just took a deep breath and repeated to myself, "This is war." I didn't waste any time. I took the blue folder and walked to Mr. Damien's office. When he saw me enter with the envelope in my hand, he dropped what he was doing and received me in the waiting room. "Let's see, Rachel, what happened now?" I handed him the notice. He read it calmly, but when he finished, he looked at me seriously. "This is no longer a simple family dispute. Now we're talking about legal abuse, a blatant attempt at dispossession, and if they manage to get this order, it's because they presented false documents. But don't worry, we will respond." That same afternoon, we worked for hours. Mr. Damien called a trusted doctor to renew my certificate of mental soundness. He also prepared a written opposition, attaching every laminated document that I had so carefully saved. Notarized affidavit, fraud complaint, previous medical certificate, everything. When I left the office, night was already falling. I walked slowly through the streets of Chicago, seeing the lights of the street vendors and hearing the distant music of a mariachi playing in the square. And although it hurt inside, I also felt firm. I was not going to let them take what was mine. The next day, I appeared in court accompanied by Mr. Damien. We had all the documentation organized. The judge who had signed the freeze order was different from the one at the first hearing. A younger, more rigid man with a hard gaze. "Your Honor," Mr. Damien began, "we are here to present clear evidence that this precautionary measure is unfounded. Mrs. Rachel Hernandez is in full mental capacity, as demonstrated by these medical and notarial certificates. Furthermore, there is an ongoing complaint for document forgery in which the petitioners, Daniel Hernandez and Mariana Lopez, are directly involved." The judge took the documents and reviewed them one by one. He looked at me over his glasses and asked, "Mrs. Hernandez, are you aware of what is happening here?" I straightened up in my chair, took a deep breath, and replied without hesitation, "Of course I am, Your Honor. My son and his wife want to take what belongs to me. But I am still the same woman who worked for 40 years as a linewoman, who raised poles under the sun, and who never failed to pay a bill. And here is the proof that I am not crazy or incompetent." The room fell silent for a few seconds. Daniel looked at me with rage. Mariana with that cynical smile I knew so well. The judge closed the file and said, "Very well. We will review this evidence and issue a ruling shortly." I left the courthouse with my heart racing, but with my head held high. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Daniel and Mariana had resources, they lied without shame, and they didn't care about tarnishing my name. But I also knew that I was no longer the submissive woman from before. The following days were a waiting game. I continued with my routine, although with my money frozen, everything became more complicated. I couldn't withdraw cash. I couldn't pay my bills normally. I had to resort to the little cash savings I kept in a drawer. One afternoon, while I was at the neighborhood store buying beans and bread, I heard two women murmuring behind my back. They say, "Mrs. Rachel isn't well anymore, that her son is taking care of her because she's spending her money on nonsense. Oh, how sad, isn't it? A woman who worked her whole life and now this." I didn't turn around. I didn't say anything. But those words pierced me like knives. The legal attack wasn't enough. Now they also wanted to kill me while I was alive, destroying my reputation in the community. That night, sitting on the porch with the radio off, I thought about everything I had been through. The betrayal of Daniel, the humiliations from Mariana, the lies in court, And I understood that I couldn't just stay on the defensive. I had to respond with the truth, with evidence, with firmness. I called Mr. Damien and told him, "Counselor, I don't just want to defend myself anymore. I want to go on the attack." He was silent for a few seconds and then replied, "That's what I was waiting for you to say, Rachel. We are going to formally sue for identity theft, fraud, and emotional distress. This is no longer just a defense. It's about justice." And so we did. The next day, we filed the complaint with the prosecutor's office. We submitted copies of all the evidence, the forged signatures, the attempted bank fraud, the malicious rumors. Everything was recorded in official records. As we were leaving the prosecutor's office, Mr. Damien put a hand on my shoulder and said, "This won't be won in a day, Rachel, but believe me, every document we are submitting is another brick in the wall that stops them. And sooner or later, that wall will be so high they won't be able to climb it." That night I slept a little better, not because the war was over, but because I finally felt that I was not alone, that there was a clear path, that I was fighting on the right side. What I didn't know was that Daniel and Mariana, feeling cornered, would prepare an even dirtier blow. Something that would not only affect me, but would put at risk everything I had built in my life. My name, my house, my peace of mind. And that blow would come sooner than I imagined. The calm I had felt after filing the complaint didn't last long. One morning, while I was sweeping the patio with my old broom, I heard the 3 sharp knocks on the gate again. I approached with a premonition that something bad was coming. When I opened it, I found 2 court officers. One of them, young, barely looked up as he spoke. "Mrs. Rachel Hernandez?" "That's me," I replied. "We have a notice. You need to sign for receipt." They handed me another thick envelope. I took it calmly, signed my name, and closed the gate. I walked to the kitchen with the envelope in my hand. I opened it slowly, like someone who knows there's no good news inside, and there it was. A provisional order requesting the seizure of my house, arguing that my assets were at risk of being squandered due to administrative incompetence. I sat at the table, looking at the walls that I myself had built with my own hands more than 40 years ago. This roof that had protected my husband David until his last days. This patio where Daniel played as a child with a plastic ball. And now, my own son was asking for it to be seized as if I were a stranger, an old woman with a mind incapable of taking care of herself. I didn't cry, but I felt a deep pain, beyond any physical wound I had ever had in my life as a linewoman. Because losing money is hard, but having them try to take your home, that's tearing out your soul. I took a deep breath, poured myself a strong coffee, and dialed Mr. Damien's number. "Counselor, I just received another notice. Now they're coming after my house." On the other end, I heard a brief silence, and then his firm voice. "Stay calm, Rachel. That house has been registered in your name for decades. No one can touch it without your consent. We will stop this." That same afternoon, we met in his office. I showed him the documents, and he reviewed them patiently. "Look, Rachel, this is a dirty move, but it has no legal standing. They're trying to use any loophole to apply pressure. We will respond with an immediate appeal. And furthermore, now we will file the lawsuit for emotional distress, because what they are doing is not just fraud, it's public humiliation." I nodded in silence. I had no tears left, only a firm determination not to give in. The days that followed were tense. Some neighbors, misinformed by the rumors Mariana had spread, began to look at me with suspicion. One lady commented aloud as I passed by the store, "How sad! So many years of work, and now she doesn't even know what she's doing." I didn't stop to answer, but those words hurt me like few things in my life, because it wasn't just my son who was turning his back on me. Now it was the neighborhood itself, the people who had seen me grow up, work, and grow old. One night, as I sat in my rocking chair with the radio off, a memory of David came to me. He used to tell me, "Rachel, you don't beg for respect, you earn it every day. And when someone tries to take it from you, you have to defend it with tooth and nail." That phrase stuck in my head, and I decided that's what I was going to do. The next day, Mr. Damien accompanied me to the courthouse to file the formal opposition to the seizure. We brought everything: the original deed to the house, the property tax payments up to date, proof that I had lived there for 40 years. The judge received the folder, reviewed it, and set a hearing for a week later. That week was the longest of my life. Daniel didn't call, neither did Mariana. The silence was total, but a heavy silence, like a storm building on the horizon. I continued with my routine, waking up early, watering the plants, cooking a pot of beans. But every time I looked at the walls of my house, I felt a mix of pride and fear. Pride because I knew what it had cost me to build it. Fear because my own son wanted to snatch it away from me. On the day of the hearing, we arrived early at the courthouse. I was wearing my well-ironed blue shirt, the same one I wore to the first hearing. Mr. Damien accompanied me with his briefcase full of documents. When we entered the courtroom, there they were again, Daniel and Mariana, she with her haughty smile, he avoiding my gaze. The judge began the session with a dry voice. "We are here to review the request for a preventive seizure of the property located at." He mentioned my full address. I felt a chill. Daniel's lawyer took the floor. With a theatrical tone, he said that I was no longer in a condition to manage my assets, that my estate was at risk, and that the family only wanted to protect it. He presented copies of forged documents, contracts I had never signed, even testimonies from supposed acquaintances who claimed to have seen me lost on the street. When it was our turn, Mr. Damien stood up calmly. He opened the folder and presented each true document: the original deed, the property tax payments, the notarial acts, everything in order, impeccable. "Your Honor," he said with a firm voice, "this seizure attempt is baseless. Here is the proof that Mrs. Rachel Hernandez is the legitimate, conscious, and capable owner of her property. Furthermore, there is already a formal complaint against Daniel Hernandez and Mariana Lopez for document forgery. What they seek here is not to protect, but to dispossess." The judge listened in silence, reviewed the papers, and looked directly at me. "Mrs. Hernandez, do you have anything to add?" I stood up, my voice trembling but firm. "Yes, Your Honor. I built this house with my own hands, brick by brick, working under the sun and the rain. I raised my son here. I cared for my husband here, until the last day of his life. And now that same son wants to take it from me. I will not allow it." The courtroom fell silent. Daniel looked down. Mariana pressed her lips together. The judge sighed and said, "Very well. The court will take all the evidence into account and will issue a ruling in the coming days." We left the courtroom with our hearts in our throats. There was no immediate ruling, but we knew the evidence was on our side. That afternoon, back at home, I sat in my rocking chair and looked at the tin roof I still had from the first room I built. I felt pride. Pride that I hadn't given up. Pride that I had defended what was mine. But I also knew that Daniel and Mariana would not stop. Each defeat would make them more dangerous, more dirty. And what came next confirmed it. Because if before they had tried to defame me in the neighborhood and take my house, now they would seek to destroy the only thing that still sustained me, my dignity as a woman and as a mother. And that attack would be the lowest of all. The days following the seizure hearing were strange. The judge hadn't ruled yet, but I knew the evidence was on our side. However, Daniel and Mariana didn't stay still. It seemed every defeat made them fiercer, more willing to sink me by any means necessary. And this time, they didn't come with papers or lawyers. They came with something much worse: the poison of gossip, of defamation. One morning, while going to the corner store for a sweet roll, I heard two neighbors talking in low voices, but loud enough for me to catch every word. They say Mrs. Rachel isn't well, that she signs papers without realizing it. Yeah, that she's even giving her things away. Daniel is worried. They say the poor old woman has gone crazy. I felt a punch to the stomach. They didn't even notice I was behind them, with the bag of bread in my hand. I said nothing. I walked back home slowly, as if carrying a huge stone on my shoulders. But the rumor didn't stop there. That same afternoon, Mrs. Rita, a lifelong neighbor, a simple woman who sometimes came to help me with the cleaning, called me. "Rachel," she said with an apologetic voice. "I don't know how to tell you this, but Daniel and Mariana are going around saying you don't even know who you are anymore, that you're spending all your money on people who are deceiving you." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. "Thanks for letting me know, Rita. Don't worry. I know how to respond." I hung up and stared at the ceiling of my house, remembering the words of my late husband, David. "You don't beg for respect, Rachel. You defend it." That night, I made a decision. Notarized affidavits and medical certificates were no longer enough. I had to look people in the eye and tell them the truth. The next day, I recorded a new video. This time, I sat in the patio, with the sunlight illuminating my face. I spoke slowly, looking directly at the camera. "I am Rachel Hernandez. Some of you have known me for decades. I've worked as a linewoman my whole life. I have paid every bill. I have helped neighbors. I raised my son with the little I had. Today, I want to tell you something. I am still here, lucid, conscious, with my life in order. Don't believe the rumors. I know who I am, and I know what I have. I sent that video via WhatsApp to all my contacts. I also asked some friends to share it. In a few hours, it was circulating throughout the neighborhood. Some neighbors sent me messages of support. Others approached me on the street to say hello. But I also know there were those who preferred to stick with Daniel and Mariana's version. I confirmed it a few days later. I went to church on a Sunday morning, as I always did, and upon entering, I felt eyes fixed on my back. Some greeted me warmly, but others barely nodded their heads with distrust. The poison of gossip had seeped in, even in that place that had always been a refuge for me. Back home, I sat on the porch with a heavy heart. I thought of David, of how he always found a way to encourage me, and then I remembered another of his phrases. Rachel, the truth is slow, but it arrives, and when it arrives, it shines brighter than any lie. I decided I was not going to give up. That same Monday, I went to Mr. Damien and told him what was happening in the neighborhood. He listened with a frown. Rachel, what they are seeking now is to break you emotionally. They want you to feel alone, isolated. But don't worry, we are already preparing the complaint for emotional distress, and these rumors only strengthen it. I nodded. But deep down I knew the wound was already there, because it's one thing to fight in a courtroom, and another to feel that your own neighbors doubt you. The last straw came that same week. One afternoon, someone knocked on the gate. When I opened it, I found two men I didn't know, accompanied by a woman who claimed to be a social worker. Good afternoon, Mrs. Hernandez. We have received complaints that you are living in inadequate conditions and that you might be a victim of financial abuse. We need to come in to verify. I felt my face burn with anger. Who told you that? I asked in a firm voice. They are anonymous complaints. We have to follow protocol. I took a deep breath, and although my blood was boiling inside, I opened the door for them. I showed them around my house, the clean living room, the tidy kitchen, the well-kept patio, everything in its place. In the end, the social worker looked at me and said, Mrs. Hernandez, we apologize for the inconvenience. At first glance, everything is in order. We will file a positive report. She handed me a confirmation slip and they left. But I was left with a bitter taste. Daniel and Mariana hadn't just invented rumors. Now they were using institutions to humiliate me, as if I were a helpless old woman incapable of taking care of herself. I couldn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling, remembering every sacrifice I made for Daniel, and I asked myself over and over, at what point did he stop seeing me as a mother and start seeing me as an obstacle? The next day, I went to Mr. Damien again. I told him about the social worker's visit. He frowned, took notes, and said, This confirms what we suspected. They are trying to build a case of neglect or incapacity to strengthen their claims. But don't worry, Rachel. We have more than enough evidence to prove all of this is false. I nodded in silence. It was no longer just a legal fight. It was a battle for my dignity, for my name, for my place in the community. The following days, I strengthened my ties with some trusted neighbors. Mrs. Rita started visiting me more often, bringing me tamales or just keeping me company in the afternoon. Mr. Arindo, the construction worker, offered to testify in my favor if necessary. That support gave me strength, but the hardest blow was yet to come. One afternoon, I received a call from the courthouse. They informed me that Daniel had presented new witnesses who claimed I suffered from episodes of mental confusion, that I got lost in the streets, that I forgot names people I didn't even know. I hung up the phone with a lump in my throat. They no longer just wanted my money or my house. They wanted to destroy my dignity, to paint me as a senile old woman in front of everyone. That night, I sat on the porch with my coffee. The sky was starry, but inside me, there was a storm, and I made myself a promise. Even if I had to go to every hearing, even if I had to look people in the eye to repeat who I am, I would not let them take away the only thing I had left, my honor. And with that determination, I prepared for what was to come, because I knew that the next hearing wouldn't just be about assets or properties. It would be about my name, about my identity, about my right to be respected as a woman. The morning of the hearing dawned gray, with low clouds that seemed to announce a storm. I had slept little, mentally reviewing every document, every word I had to say. On the kitchen table lay my inseparable blue folder, laminated and organized, with all the papers that gave me strength. Medical certificates, notarized affidavits, police reports. That folder was more than a set of documents. It was my shield. I put on my best dark blue shirt, the same one I had worn in previous hearings, well-ironed twill pants, and polished shoes. I wanted to arrive at the tribunal not as a defeated old woman, but as a dignified woman, aware of who she is. Mr. Damien picked me up at my front door. He carried his black briefcase and had a firm look in his eyes. "Today is going to be tough, Rachel," he told me. "They are bringing false witnesses, prepared to testify that you are confused, that you don't know how to manage your life. But don't worry, we have solid evidence, and most importantly, your word." I nodded in silence. I knew this would be the most difficult battle because it wasn't about assets or money. It was about my honor, my capacity, my name. Arriving at the tribunal, I saw Daniel and Mariana waiting for us in the hall. She, as always, with her cynical smile. He, with his head held high, but avoiding looking me in the eye. Behind them, 3 unknown people, the supposed witnesses. The judge, an older man with a stern gaze, opened the hearing with a firm voice. "We are here to hear the statements presented by the petitioners regarding the possible incapacity of Mrs. Rachel Hernandez." Daniel's lawyer stood up and began his show. He called the first witness, a woman who claimed to have seen me lost on the street, not recognizing where I was. I saw her near the market, walking in circles. When I asked if she was okay, she replied that she didn't remember her address. I looked at her intently. I had never seen her before in my life. The second witness was a man who claimed that I had tried to pay the same bill twice at the store. Another lie. And the third, a supposed neighbor, testified that he had seen me talking to myself on the porch, as if I were confused. Each word was a dagger. Not because they were true, but because they came with the intention of destroying my image, of turning me into a useless old woman in the eyes of the judge. When they finished, the judge looked directly at me. "Mrs. Hernandez, what do you have to say in response to these statements?" I stood up slowly, the blue folder in my hand. I took a deep breath and spoke slowly, without shouting, but with firmness. "Your Honor, I have never seen these people. What they are saying is false. Here are the medical certificates that confirm my full lucidity. Here is the notarized affidavit where I attest to my capacity. And here, my expense receipts, all in order, without a single mistake." I opened the folder and showed each document. Mr. Damien also stood up and handed them to the judge, one by one. "Furthermore," I continued, "I have real witnesses, people who have known me for decades. My neighbor Rita, who helps me with cleaning, can say that I keep my house in order. Mr. Arindo, my neighbor, the construction worker, can testify that I manage my accounts and that he has never seen me confused." The judge listened in silence. Daniel looked at me with contained anger. Mariana, for the first time, seemed uncomfortable. The judge called Rita and Arindo, who were present as witnesses for my defense. Both spoke simply, but truthfully. "I come to Rachel's house every week," said Rita. "Everything is clean, orderly. She pays on time and knows perfectly well what day it is, what she has to do. I've known her for 30 years, added Arindo. "I've seen her work, pay her bills, manage her money. She is a lucid and conscious woman." The contrast between the false and true statements was abysmal. The judge spoke again. "I have reviewed the documents and listened to all the witnesses. The statements presented by the petitioners lack solid support. On the contrary, Mrs. Rachel Hernandez's evidence clearly shows that she maintains her full capacity." He paused and then continued. "Therefore, this tribunal rejects any attempt to declare Mrs. Rachel Hernandez incapacitated. Furthermore, a formal investigation is opened for perjury in testimonies and documents." I felt my legs tremble, but not from fear. It was relief. It was justice. I closed my eyes for a few seconds and took a deep breath. Daniel lowered his head. Mariana bit her lips until they almost broke. They knew they had lost, at least for now. As we left the tribunal, Mr. Damien shook my hand firmly. "You did it, Rachel. You not only defended your assets, you defended your name, and that's worth more than any money." We walked together down the courthouse corridor. I was silent, clutching the blue folder to my chest. It wasn't a victory for celebration or applause. It was a quiet, intimate, but profound triumph. That afternoon, back at home, I sat on the porch with a hot coffee. The sky was beginning to clear, and the first rays of sun filtered through the clouds. I looked around. My house was still standing, my papers in order, my dignity intact, but deep down, I knew there was still one more step. Because although I had won in court, Daniel and Mariana were not going to stop. And what was at stake was no longer just my house or my accounts. It was my future, my peace of mind, my very life. That night, as the neighborhood grew quiet, I thought about everything that had happened. I remembered David, my childhood in the countryside, the years as a linewoman, the sacrifices for Daniel, and I understood that the most valuable thing I had was not material possessions. It was my story, my dignity, my ability to look anyone in the eye and say, "Here I am, lucid, conscious, and dignified." With that certainty, I went to sleep, and as I closed my eyes, I knew the worst was yet to come. Because Daniel and Mariana, wounded in their pride, would prepare one last blow, the lowest of them all. After the hearing, I thought things would finally calm down. It had been proven before the judge that I was lucid, that I didn't need anyone to be my guardian. The false witnesses had contradicted themselves, and the court had ordered an investigation against Daniel and Mariana for perjury. For me, that was enough. It was as if I had reclaimed my name in front of everyone. But I was wrong. Those who live by lies do not accept defeat easily. A few days of strange silence passed. No calls, no messages, no knocks on the gate. I continued with my routine: coffee in the morning, sweeping the patio, listening to the radio in the afternoons. But every time the phone rang, my heart raced. I knew something was still missing, the final blow. And it came on a Saturday afternoon. I was sitting on the porch when I heard a knock on the door. Not loud knocks. 3 soft, almost respectful taps. I opened cautiously and found a man in a dark suit carrying a folder. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Hernandez. I am a process server from the public prosecutor's office. I am here to inform you that there is a complaint against you for abandonment of family duties and psychological abuse." I felt the air leave my lungs. Abandonment? Abuse? I, who had given everything for my son, who had sacrificed my health, my money, my years of work, was now being accused of being a bad mother. "Who filed this complaint?" I asked, although I already knew the answer. "Your son, Daniel Hernandez, and his wife, Mariana Lopez." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I signed the receipt and went back into the house. I sat at the kitchen table with trembling hands. This time, they didn't want my money or my house. They wanted to destroy my memory as a mother. I spent the night awake, staring at the ceiling and remembering moments with Daniel as a child. When I took him to school by the hand, when I bought him his first bicycle, when I spent 3 nights awake in the hospital, taking care of his broken arm. And now that same child, now a man, was accusing me of abuse. The next morning, I called Mr. Damien. I told him everything with a broken voice. He was silent for a few seconds and then said, "Rachel, this is the lowest they could go, but don't worry. We will respond. You have ways to prove that you were always a present mother, that you never abandoned your son." That same week, we gathered evidence, old photographs, paid school receipts, witnesses who could attest to my dedication as a mother. Rita, my neighbor, offered to testify that for years she saw Daniel coming in and out of my house, always under my care. Mr. Arindo said he remembered when I worked overtime to pay for my son's education. The day of the hearing for the complaint arrived. I was more nervous than ever, because it's one thing for them to want to take your assets, and quite another for them to try to erase your history as a mother. We entered the courtroom. Daniel and Mariana were there, with their haughty looks. The prosecutor began by reading the complaint, that I had been an absent mother, that I had inflicted psychological abuse, that because of this, Daniel had had to fend for himself. Hearing those words was like being stabbed in the heart. When it was my turn, I stood up slowly. I held an old photo in my hand. Daniel as a child, smiling in his school uniform, hugging me. I held it up and showed it to the judge. "Your Honor, this is my son. I took him to school every day until he was grown. I bought his school supplies. I cared for him when he was sick. I tucked him in on cold nights. Here are the school receipts. Here are the neighbors who can testify how we grew up together." My voice trembled, but every word came out with truth. The judge reviewed the evidence, listened to Rita and Arindo, who testified simply, and then he looked me in the eyes. "Mrs. Hernandez, it is clear that you did not abandon your son. On the contrary, you were a present and dedicated mother. The complaint filed is without merit, and furthermore, an investigation is ordered for a false report against the petitioners." Daniel lowered his head. Mariana squeezed her husband's arm with contained fury. I felt a huge weight fall from my shoulders. Leaving the tribunal, Mr. Damien hugged me tightly. "It's over, Rachel. It's over." I walked back home with slow but light steps. The Chicago sun was shining brightly, and for the first time in a long time, I felt its warmth on my skin. That afternoon, I sat on the porch with a hot coffee. I looked at the clear sky and felt a peace I hadn't felt in years. I thought of David, of everything we had lived through together. I thought of Daniel as a child, how I used to carry him on my shoulders, and although the pain of his betrayal was still there, it was no longer a pain that crushed me. It was a pain that reminded me that I had done the right thing, that I had been a good mother, even if he didn't recognize it. Life had taught me something. Material possessions can be lost. Accounts can be emptied. Even a reputation can be tarnished with gossip. But dignity? No one can take that from you if you don't surrender it. I looked around. My house was still standing. My papers were in order. My name had been cleared by justice. Daniel and Mariana could continue to hate. They could continue to plot. But I was no longer afraid. Because in the end, I understood that the greatest victory was not having won a trial or protected my assets. The greatest victory was being able to sit on my porch, look at the sky, and tell myself, "Rachel Hernandez, you remained standing. They didn't bend you. They didn't break you. And that, for a woman my age, is worth more than any inheritance." If you have made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. And I also want to thank the channel Grandparents' Voices for giving me this space to share my truth. If this story resonated with you, support me with a like and subscribe to the channel. There is a new story here every day, and who knows, maybe one of them will be just like yours.